What if I told you that the most powerful people in any room are rarely the loudest? That true influence has nothing to do with how much you speak, how aggressively you assert yourself, or how desperately you try to be noticed. What if everything you've been taught about power, leadership, and influence is backwards? Look around. In every workplace, every social gathering, every negotiation, there's always someone who dominates the conversation. They interrupt, they raise their voice, they make sure everyone knows their opinion. They mistake volume for authority and attention for respect. And here's what's fascinating. Most people assume this person has power, but they don't. They're performing power, which is the opposite of possessing it. Real power is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need validation. It doesn't beg for attention or approval. The truly powerful person in the room is the one watching, listening, calculating. They speak rarely, but when they do, everyone stops to listen. They don't chase influence. It comes to them. They don't demand respect. They command it naturally through their presence alone. This audiobook will completely rewire how you understand power and influence. You're about to discover why quiet confidence is infinitely more magnetic than loud bravado. Why strategic silence accomplishes more than constant speaking. Why restraint is a weapon that most people never learn to use. And most importantly, you're about to learn how to become the kind of person who controls every situation without ever appearing to try. By the time you finish this journey, you will move differently. You will speak differently. You will think differently. People will sense something has changed about you, but they won't be able to identify what. That's the mark of true power. It's felt, not seen. It influences without announcing its presence. And that's exactly what you're about to master. Chapter 1. Why the loudest person is usually the weakest. Here's a truth that will change how you see every interaction for the rest of your life. The person trying hardest to prove they have power is always the one who has the least. Think about it. Have you ever noticed that people with real authority rarely need to remind others of it? A true leader doesn't walk into a room announcing their credentials. A genuinely confident person doesn't constantly seek validation. Someone with actual expertise doesn't feel the need to dominate every conversation to prove they know what they're talking about. But insecure people, they can't help themselves. They interrupt because they're terrified of being forgotten. They speak loudly because they're afraid their ideas won't be taken seriously. They name drop, they brag, they peacock, all because deep down they know they haven't earned genuine respect. So they're trying to manufacture it through noise and spectacle. This is the fundamental weakness of loud power. It's compensatory. It's a performance designed to mask insecurity. And here's what's even more revealing. Truly powerful people can see right through it. When someone walks into a negotiation puffing their chest and making demands, experienced operators don't see strength. They see desperation. They see someone who can be manipulated because their ego is exposed and vulnerable. Let me give you a real-world example. Imagine two people in a business meeting. Person A dominates the conversation, speaks over others, insists their strategy is the only viable option, and gets visibly frustrated when questioned. Person B sits quietly for most of the meeting, asks a few precise questions, and then calmly presents a well-thought-out alternative when everyone else has exhausted themselves arguing. Who do you think gets taken more seriously? Person A created noise, but person B created impact. Person A tried to control the room through force, but person B controlled it through strategic restraint. And here's the crucial part. Person B didn't have to fight for respect. The quality of their presence and the precision of their contribution earned it automatically. This pattern repeats everywhere. The most respected professors aren't the ones who lecture non-stop. They're the ones who create space for deep thought and speak only when they have something genuinely valuable to add. The most influential leaders aren't the ones barking orders constantly. They're the ones who set a clear vision and then trust their team, stepping in only when truly needed. The most magnetic people at social events aren't working the room desperately trying to impress everyone. They're the ones having a few deep, meaningful conversations that people remember long after the event ends. Now, here's where it gets psychologically interesting. Loud, aggressive displays of power actually trigger resistance in others. When someone comes at you with force, your natural instinct is to push back, to defend yourself, to resist their influence. It's a fundamental aspect of human psychology. We don't like feeling controlled or dominated. So we instinctively oppose anyone who tries to force their will upon us. But quiet power? It bypasses all of that resistance. When someone influences you subtly, when they guide rather than command, when they suggest rather than demand, you don't feel controlled. In fact, you often don't even realize you're being influenced at all. You think the idea was yours. You think you came to that conclusion independently. And that's exactly why quiet power is so devastatingly effective. It works with human psychology instead of against it. The loudest person is weak because they've already shown you their insecurity. They've revealed that they need your validation, your attention, your submission. And the moment someone needs something from you, you have power over them. But the quietly powerful person, they need nothing from you. They're completely self-contained. And that independence, that self-sufficiency, is magnetic in a way that desperation never can be. So if you've been trying to gain influence by speaking more, by asserting yourself more aggressively, by making sure everyone notices you, stop. You're working against yourself. The path to real power runs in the exact opposite direction. It starts with silence, observation, and strategic restraint. It starts with becoming the person who doesn't need to prove anything, because your presence alone communicates everything. Chapter 2. The Psychology of Presence. How to command attention without seeking it. There's a phenomenon in social psychology that most people never consciously recognize, but everyone unconsciously responds to. It's called presence. And it's the invisible force that makes certain people magnetic without them doing anything obvious to earn attention. You've experienced this. You've been in rooms where someone walks in and the energy shifts. Not because they announced themselves, not because they did anything dramatic, but simply because of who they are and how they carry themselves. This is not mystical. This is not about charisma you're born with. Presence is a set of specific, learnable behaviors and mental frameworks that signal to everyone around you that you are someone worth paying attention to. And the beautiful irony is that the less you actively seek attention, the more powerfully you command it. Let me break down what's actually happening psychologically when someone has true presence. First, they have complete comfort with themselves. They're not fidgeting, not scanning the room anxiously, not rushing to fill every silence with words. This signals to everyone else that this person is secure, grounded, and in control of themselves. And humans are wired to notice and respect that kind of self-possession. Second, they move with intention. Every gesture, every movement, every word is deliberate. There's no wasted energy, no nervous habits, no random motion. This creates the impression of someone who is thoughtful and purposeful in everything they do. Compare this to the person who fidgets constantly, shifts their weight, plays with their phone, checks their watch. All of that unconscious movement communicates anxiety and lack of focus. Third, and this is crucial, they make other people feel seen. When someone with true presence talks to you, you feel like you're the only person in the room. They're not scanning for someone more important to talk to. They're not half listening while thinking about what they'll say next. They're fully, genuinely present with you in that moment. And ironically, that focused attention on others is what makes them so magnetic to everyone. Now here's the practical framework for developing this kind of presence. It starts with something most people completely overlook: your internal state. You cannot fake presence. If your mind is chaotic, if you're anxious about how you're being perceived, if you're constantly judging yourself or others, all of that internal turbulence will leak through your body language and energy, even if you're trying to appear calm. So the foundation of presence is internal stillness. Before you can command a room, you must command your own mind. This means developing the ability to quiet mental chatter, to release the need for validation, to become genuinely comfortable with who you are. When you're not at war with yourself internally, that peace radiates outward and others feel it immediately. The second element is intentional physicality. Most people move through the world unconsciously. They slouch without realizing it. They rush without needing to. They fidget because they don't know what else to do with their hands. If you want presence, every physical action must become conscious and intentional. Stand with your weight balanced. Move smoothly and purposefully. When you gesture, make it meaningful, not random. When you sit, sit fully. Don't perch on the edge of your chair like you're ready to flee. The third element, and this is where most people get it wrong, is strategic attention. Presence is not about making everyone notice you. It's about the quality of attention you give to others and to your environment. When you enter a room, don't immediately start talking or seeking recognition. Observe first. Notice the energy, the dynamics, the unspoken tensions. This makes you read the room better than anyone else, which means when you do speak or act, you do so with perfect timing and relevance. Here's a practical example of how this works. Imagine you're in a meeting where everyone is arguing, talking over each other, trying to get their point across. The person without presence jumps into the fray, raising their voice to be heard, fighting for attention. The person with presence does something completely different. They sit back. They observe. They notice who's actually making sense and who's just creating noise. They wait for a natural pause, and then they speak calmly, often starting with something like, "I've noticed something interesting here," or "Can I offer a different perspective?" Instantly, the energy shifts. Everyone stops because this person wasn't fighting for attention, which means when they choose to speak, it must be important. Their calm, grounded presence creates a contrast to all the chaos. And that contrast is what captures everyone's focus. They commanded the room without raising their voice, without interrupting, without any aggressive display. They did it purely through the quality of their presence. The final element of presence is emotional neutrality. People with weak presence are emotionally reactive. You can see their mood shift with every comment, every look, every change in the environment. But people with true presence maintain emotional equilibrium regardless of external circumstances. This doesn't mean being cold or robotic. It means not being thrown off balance by praise or criticism, by success or setbacks, by approval or rejection. This stability makes you a fixed point in a chaotic world, and people naturally gravitate toward that stability. So, if you want to develop real presence, stop trying to be noticed. Stop performing. Stop seeking validation through attention. Instead, master yourself first. Become so internally calm and self-possessed that you don't need anything from anyone. Then, bring that grounded energy into every interaction. Move with purpose. Speak with intention. Give others your full attention. And maintain your emotional center, no matter what happens around you. Do this consistently, and you won't need to seek attention ever again. It will come to you naturally, magnetically, inevitably. Chapter 3. Strategic silence. When not speaking is your greatest weapon. In a world where everyone is desperately trying to be heard, silence has become the ultimate power move. But most people are terrified of silence. They fill every pause with words, every gap in conversation with nervous chatter, every moment of quiet with some kind of noise. They think silence makes them invisible, forgettable, powerless. They couldn't be more wrong. Strategic silence is one of the most potent forms of influence that exists, and it works precisely because so few people understand how to use it. When everyone else is talking, the person who remains silent becomes the most powerful person in the room, not because they're hiding or withdrawing, but because they're operating on a completely different level. While others reveal their thoughts, their strategies, their weaknesses through constant talking, the silent observer is gathering information, reading dynamics, and identifying leverage points that the talkers will never see. Let me explain the psychology behind why silence is so powerful. First, silence creates mystery and intrigue. When you don't immediately offer your opinion, when you don't rush to fill the void, people become curious about what you're thinking. They start to wonder. They start to project onto you. They start to imagine that your silence must mean you know something they don't. And often, they'll reveal more information trying to figure you out than they would have if you'd been the one doing all the talking. Second, silence gives you time to think strategically while everyone else is reacting emotionally. In any tense conversation or negotiation, the person talking is usually operating from emotion, urgency, or ego. They're not thinking 3 moves ahead. They're just trying to win the current moment. But the silent person has the luxury of observation. They can see patterns, anticipate responses, and formulate a strategy that accounts for all the information being freely given by others. Third, and this is crucial, silence forces others to fill the void. And when people talk to fill silence, they almost always reveal more than they intended. This is a fundamental principle in negotiation, interrogation, and sales. The person comfortable with silence has a massive advantage because the other party will eventually get uncomfortable and start talking. And when they do, they'll give away information, make concessions, or expose vulnerabilities they never meant to reveal. Here's how strategic silence works in practice. Imagine you're in a salary negotiation. You state your desired number, and then you stop talking. The hiring manager might counter with a lower number. Most people would immediately respond, either arguing for their number or explaining why they deserve it. But someone who understands strategic silence does something different. They simply wait. They maintain eye contact. They don't fidget. They don't rush to fill the pause. And here's what happens. The hiring manager, uncomfortable with the silence, starts talking again. Maybe they justify their counteroffer. Maybe they ask, "What would make you happy?" Maybe they even improve their offer without you saying a word. Your silence did the work for you. Or consider a conflict situation. Someone is angry with you, raising their voice, making accusations. The instinct is to defend yourself immediately, to argue back, to match their energy. But strategic silence is far more powerful. You let them speak. You don't interrupt. You don't react. You simply listen with calm, neutral attention. What happens? First, they eventually run out of steam. Anger requires fuel. And if you're not feeding the fire with defensive reactions, it burns itself out. Second, as they talk, they often realize they're being unreasonable, or they contradict themselves, and you didn't have to say a word. Third, your calm, silent response makes you appear more mature, more in control, and more trustworthy than someone who immediately escalated the situation. But here's where most people misunderstand silence. Strategic silence is not about never speaking. It's not about being passive or withdrawn. It's about speaking only when your words will have maximum impact. It's about making every word count, because you've thought carefully about what needs to be said and when to say it. There's a pattern you'll notice among the most powerful communicators. They speak less, but when they speak, everyone listens. Why? Because they've built a reputation for only contributing when they have something genuinely valuable to add. Their words carry weight, precisely because they're not diluted by constant chatter. Compare this to someone who comments on everything, who always has an opinion, who can't let a single point pass without adding their thoughts. Their words lose value through sheer volume. Nobody pays attention anymore because they know this person will talk whether they have insight or not. Strategic silence also protects you from one of the biggest mistakes people make in communication: saying too much. Every additional word is a potential vulnerability. Every unnecessary detail is something that can be used against you. Every extra piece of information is ammunition you've handed to others. Powerful people understand this instinctively. They answer questions directly, but don't elaborate unnecessarily. They share what needs to be shared and keep everything else private. They know that mystery is power and oversharing is weakness. So how do you develop the ability to use strategic silence effectively? First, you must become genuinely comfortable with quiet. Practice being in silence, in your own thoughts, without the need to fill every moment with stimulation. Most people can't sit in silence for even 5 minutes without reaching for their phone or turning on music or finding some distraction. If you can't be comfortable in silence with yourself, you'll never be able to use it as a tool with others. Second, train yourself to pause before responding to anything. Someone asks you a question, pause. Someone makes a statement, pause. Someone provokes you, pause. This does multiple things. It gives you time to formulate a thoughtful response instead of an emotional reaction. It communicates that you're someone who thinks before speaking, and it creates a subtle psychological pressure on the other person to continue talking, potentially revealing more than they intended. Third, learn to recognize when silence will accomplish more than speaking. If someone is making a fool of themselves, your silence lets them continue digging their own hole. If someone is trying to manipulate you into a reaction, your silence denies them the satisfaction. If someone is waiting for you to reveal information, your silence protects your position. The question you should always ask yourself before speaking is, will my words improve upon the silence? If the answer is no, say nothing. Chapter 4. The Power of Restraint. Less is always more. One of the most counterintuitive truths about power is this: the more you have, the less you need to use it. Real power is characterized by restraint, not display. It's about what you choose not to do, not what you choose to do. And this concept is completely alien to most people because they've been conditioned to believe that power means taking action, making moves, demonstrating capability. But that's the thinking of someone who doesn't actually have power, someone trying to prove they have it. Think about the most powerful entities in the world. They don't constantly flex their strength. A wealthy person doesn't need to talk about their money or flaunt their possessions. A skilled fighter doesn't need to prove their abilities in every confrontation. A truly intelligent person doesn't need to remind everyone in the room how smart they are. Why? Because real power is secure in itself. It doesn't require external validation. It doesn't need to be performed or proven. It simply exists, and its existence is self-evident to anyone paying attention. Restraint is power because it demonstrates control. Anyone can lash out when provoked. Anyone can spend money impulsively when they have it. Anyone can speak constantly if they want attention. Those are easy, thoughtless reactions that require no discipline. But choosing not to react when you're provoked, choosing not to spend when you easily could, choosing to stay silent when you have the urge to speak, that requires strength. That requires mastery over yourself. And self-mastery is the foundation of all other forms of power. Let me give you a framework for understanding why less is always more. Every time you exert power overtly, you deplete it. Every time you have to remind people of your authority, you reveal that your authority is questionable. Every time you respond to every criticism or provocation, you show that you can be controlled by others. But when you practice restraint, when you choose not to engage, when you let things unfold without your constant intervention, you preserve and even amplify your power. Here's a practical example. Imagine someone publicly criticizes you or your work. The immediate impulse is to defend yourself, to correct the record, to argue your position. And if you do that, what happens? You've now entered into a public debate with someone who probably has nothing to lose. You've given their criticism legitimacy by acknowledging it. You've shown that their words affected you enough to warrant a response. And if the exchange continues, you risk looking petty or defensive, regardless of who's actually right. But what if you practice restraint? What if you simply don't respond? Here's what happens. First, the criticism hangs in the air with no fuel to sustain it. Second, you've communicated through your silence that this person's opinion isn't significant enough to warrant your time or energy. Third, others watching the situation will often defend you without you having to defend yourself. And fourth, you maintain your composure and dignity while the critic appears increasingly desperate for your attention. Your restraint made you more powerful, not less. This principle applies to everything. In negotiations, the person who can walk away has more power than the person who needs the deal. In relationships, the person who's complete in themselves has more influence than the person who's desperate for connection. In conflicts, the person who can remain calm has more control than the person who gets emotionally activated. Restraint isn't weakness. It's the ultimate demonstration of strength. Now, here's the subtle art of restraint that most people never learn. It's not about suppression. It's not about denying yourself or being passive. True restraint is active, conscious choice. It's feeling the impulse to react and choosing not to. It's having the capability to do something and deciding it's not necessary. It's possessing power and wielding it so precisely that you barely need to use it at all. Think of restraint like a master swordsman. A novice swings wildly, using maximum effort for every strike, exhausting themselves quickly. A master makes minimal movements, conserves energy, strikes only when the opening is perfect. Both have the sword, but one understands that power isn't about constant action. It's about precise, economical use of force at exactly the right moment. That's restraint. In conversation, restraint means saying less, but saying it more effectively. It means resisting the urge to comment on everything, to correct every misstatement, to prove your knowledge at every opportunity. When you do speak, people listen because they know you've chosen your words carefully. In emotional situations, restraint means feeling your anger, your frustration, your hurt, but not being controlled by those feelings. It means responding from a place of conscious choice rather than unconscious reaction. The beautiful paradox of restraint is that by doing less, you accomplish more. By speaking less, your words carry more weight. By acting less impulsively, your actions become more impactful. By needing less validation, you become more respected. Less truly is more when it comes to power, but only if your restraint comes from genuine strength rather than fear or passivity. So practice restraint in every area of your life. Resist the urge to immediately check your phone when you're bored. Resist the impulse to speak when there's a pause in conversation. Resist the temptation to prove yourself when someone questions you. Not because you're weak, but because you're strong enough to choose not to. Each act of restraint strengthens your self-control. And self-control is the foundation of every other form of power you'll ever possess. Chapter 5. Emotional Mastery. The foundation of quiet power. If you want to understand why some people have quiet power while others are constantly struggling for influence, Look at their relationship with their emotions. The quietly powerful person is not emotionless. They feel everything just as deeply as anyone else. The difference is that they are never controlled by what they feel. Their emotions inform them, but don't dictate their behavior, and that distinction is everything. Most people are emotional puppets. Pull the right string, and they react predictably. Criticize them, and they defend. Praise them, and they become agreeable. Provoke them, and they lash out. Challenge them, and they become aggressive. Their responses are automatic, unconscious, and completely controllable by anyone who understands basic human psychology. This makes them weak, regardless of their title, their wealth, or their apparent success. But someone with emotional mastery, they can't be manipulated through emotional triggers. You can try to make them angry, and they remain calm. You can try to flatter them, and they see through it. You can try to intimidate them, and they don't flinch. This makes them unpredictable to others, while remaining completely predictable to themselves, which is exactly where true power lives. Here's what emotional mastery actually looks like in practice. It's not suppressing your feelings or pretending they don't exist. It's creating space between stimulus and response. Someone says something insulting to you. An emotionally reactive person immediately feels anger and immediately responds from that anger. An emotionally masterful person feels the anger, notices it, acknowledges it, and then chooses how to respond based on what's strategically wise, not what feels emotionally satisfying in the moment. This space between feeling and reacting is where all power exists. Viktor Frankl, who survived Nazi concentration camps, said, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." This is not philosophical abstraction. This is practical power. The person who can feel intense emotion and still choose their response has infinitely more power than the person who's controlled by their emotional reactions. Let me break down why emotional mastery is the foundation of quiet power. First, it makes you unmanipulatable. Most influence tactics rely on triggering emotional responses. Salespeople create urgency to trigger fear of missing out. Manipulators use guilt to control behavior. Provocateurs use insults to make you react defensively. But if you have emotional mastery, all of these tactics fail. You see them for what they are: transparent attempts to bypass your rational mind and trigger an emotional reaction. And when you're not controlled by your emotions, you can't be controlled by others. Second, emotional mastery gives you clarity in every situation. Emotions cloud judgment. When you're angry, you make aggressive decisions you'll later regret. When you're anxious, you make fear-based choices that limit your potential. When you're euphoric, you make impulsive decisions without proper consideration. But when you have mastery over your emotional state, you can think clearly regardless of what you're feeling. This means you make better decisions consistently, which compounds into significantly better outcomes over time. Third, emotional mastery makes you a stabilizing presence that others naturally gravitate toward. Think about the people in your life. Who do you turn to when you're in crisis? Not the person who will match your panic with their own anxiety. You turn to the person who remains calm, who can think clearly, who provides stability when everything feels chaotic. That person has influence not because they're trying to influence you, but because their emotional stability is naturally attractive and reassuring. Now here's how you develop emotional mastery. It starts with awareness. You cannot master what you don't notice. Most people are so identified with their emotions that they don't even realize they're feeling them until they're already reacting. The first step is learning to notice your emotional states as they arise. I'm feeling anger building. I'm experiencing anxiety right now. That comment triggered defensiveness in me. Simple awareness creates that crucial space between feeling, reacting. The second step is understanding that emotions are information, not commands. When you feel anger, it's giving you information that something has violated your boundaries or values. When you feel anxiety, it's alerting you to potential threat or uncertainty. When you feel excitement, it's signaling opportunity or alignment with your desires. These are useful data points, but they're not orders you must obey. You can feel anger and choose not to lash out. You can feel anxiety and choose to act anyway. You can feel excitement and still think critically. The third step is developing emotional regulation techniques that work for you. This might be breath control, using slow, deliberate breathing to activate your parasympathetic nervous system and create physiological calm. It might be reframing, consciously choosing to interpret a situation differently to change your emotional response. It might be the pause, simply counting to 10 before responding to anything emotionally charged. The specific technique matters less than having tools you can deploy when you feel yourself becoming emotionally activated. The fourth step, and this is crucial, is learning to transmute emotional energy rather than suppressing it. Suppression doesn't work. If you just bottle up anger or anxiety or any strong emotion, it will eventually explode or leak out in unhealthy ways. Instead, you learn to channel that emotional energy into productive action. Feel angry? Use that energy to fuel focused work. Feel anxious? Channel it into thorough preparation. Feel disappointed? Transform it into determination. The emotion doesn't disappear, but it stops controlling you and starts serving you. Here's a practical framework for emotional mastery in real-time situations. When you feel a strong emotion arising, first pause. Don't react immediately. Second, name the emotion specifically. I'm feeling disrespected is more useful than I feel bad. Third, ask yourself what this emotion is trying to tell you. Is it valid information? Or is it an old pattern being triggered? Fourth, consider your options. You always have choices in how you respond. Fifth, choose the response that aligns with your values and long-term goals, not what feels satisfying in the moment. The person with emotional mastery doesn't need to dominate conversations because they're not seeking validation. They don't need to prove themselves because they're not insecure. They don't need to react to provocations because they're not controlled by others. They move through the world with quiet confidence because their internal state is stable regardless of external circumstances. And that stability, that self-possession, is what makes quiet power possible. Without emotional mastery, you'll always be at the mercy of your reactions. With it, you become truly free, and that freedom is the foundation of all lasting power. Chapter 6. The Art of Subtle Influence. planting ideas without forcing them. The most powerful form of influence is the kind that people don't even realize is happening. When you convince someone of something, they know you convinced them. They remember the argument, the persuasion, the effort you put in. But when you plant an idea so subtly that they think they came up with it themselves, that's permanent influence. That's the kind of power that reshapes how people think without them ever feeling manipulated or controlled. Here's the fundamental truth about human psychology that makes subtle influence possible. People resist being told what to think, but they love discovering insights on their own. You can present someone with the most logical, well-researched argument in the world, and if it contradicts their existing beliefs, they'll find a way to reject it. But if you can guide them to discover that same conclusion themselves, through their own thought process, they'll defend it as passionately as if it were their own original idea. Because in their mind, it is. This is why the most influential people rarely argue. They don't need to. They've mastered the art of asking the right questions, sharing the right stories, and creating the right context for others to reach the conclusions they want them to reach. They're not forcing ideas into people's minds. They're planting seeds and creating conditions for those seeds to grow naturally. Let me give you a framework for how subtle influence actually works. Imagine you want someone to change their approach to a project at work. The obvious, ineffective method is to tell them directly, "Your approach is wrong. You should do it this way instead." What happens? Instant defensiveness. Their ego gets activated. Now they're not evaluating whether your suggestion has merit. They're defending their original idea because you've made it a contest between your judgment and theirs. But what if you took a different approach? What if you asked questions instead? Have you considered what might happen if we approached it from this angle? What do you think the potential challenges are with the current plan? Is there a way we could test different approaches before committing fully? Notice what you're doing here. You're not telling them they're wrong. You're guiding them to evaluate their own plan more critically. You're creating doubt in their current approach while making them feel like they're the one doing the thinking. Here's what happens next. As they answer your questions, they start to see the limitations of their original idea. But because they're discovering these limitations themselves, there's no ego threat. They're not being corrected by you. They're refining their own thinking. And when they eventually land on the approach you had in mind all along, they feel smart for figuring it out. They feel ownership over the new direction, and they'll execute it with far more commitment than if you had simply told them what to do. This is the art of subtle influence. You're shaping the thought process without dictating the conclusion. You're creating the conditions for people to persuade themselves, and self-persuasion is infinitely more powerful than external persuasion because it bypasses all psychological resistance. Now let's talk about another powerful technique of subtle influence: strategic storytelling. Human brains are wired to learn through stories. When you tell someone a direct fact, they evaluate it critically, looking for reasons to accept or reject it. But when you embed that same information in a story, it slips past their critical defenses and lodges directly into their memory and belief system. Here's how this works in practice. Let's say you want to influence someone to be more decisive in their leadership. You could lecture them about the importance of decisiveness. Give them statistics about how indecisive leaders lose respect. Explain all the theory. And they might nod along, but nothing will change. Or you could tell them a story. I once worked with a leader who would agonize over every decision for weeks. The team respected his thoughtfulness at first, but eventually they started going around him to get answers because they couldn't wait for him to decide. Within 6 months, he had lost all credibility, not because he made bad decisions, but because he made no decisions. The interesting thing was, when he finally did decide, he was usually right. But by then, nobody was listening anymore. What did that story do? It illustrated the consequences of indecisiveness in a way that feels real and memorable. It created an emotional association, the fear of losing credibility, that pure logic never would have created. And most importantly, you didn't tell them to be more decisive. You let them draw that conclusion from the story. That's subtle influence. The third technique of subtle influence is what I call social proof seeding. People are heavily influenced by what they believe others think and do. But here's the subtle part. You don't need to tell someone everyone thinks this way, which sounds manipulative and triggers skepticism. Instead, you casually reference other people's perspectives as if it's just neutral information. I've noticed a lot of people in our industry are starting to rethink this approach. Just yesterday, someone was telling me they completely changed their strategy because of these new market conditions. You're not saying they should change their strategy. You're not even saying the other approach is better. You're simply planting the information that change is happening, that others are adapting. And because humans have a deep psychological need to fit in and not be left behind, this information starts working on them subconsciously. They begin to question whether they should also be rethinking their approach. And when they eventually do, they think it was their idea based on their assessment of market conditions, not realizing you planted that seed weeks ago. Here's another powerful principle of subtle influence: the agreement ladder. People are more likely to agree with you on big things if you've already gotten them to agree with you on small things. This is why skilled influencers never start with their actual request or their main point. They start with something easy to agree with, something obviously true and non-threatening. Then they build from there, each agreement making the next one easier. For example, let's say you want to convince your team to adopt a new, more demanding work process. If you start with, "We need to implement this new process," you'll face resistance immediately because people hate change and extra work. But what if you started differently? "I think we can all agree that our current results could be better, right?" Easy agreement. And we'd all like to improve without working significantly harder, correct? Another agreement. So, if there was a process that could give us better results with roughly the same effort, that would be worth exploring, wouldn't it? Now they're agreeing to explore it. Let me show you what I found. By the time you present the new process, they've already agreed to the logic that led to it. The key to all subtle influence is patience. You cannot rush this. If you try to force the conclusion too quickly, people sense the manipulation and resist. But if you're patient, if you plant seeds and let them germinate, if you guide thinking without controlling it, people will arrive at the conclusions you want them to reach, and believe those conclusions came from their own wisdom and judgment. That's when influence becomes permanent. One more critical element of subtle influence is the power of contrast and reframing. How people perceive an idea depends entirely on the context you create around it. The same proposal can seem risky or safe, expensive or affordable, radical or obvious, depending on what you compare it to and how you frame it. Master influencers understand this and use it constantly. Imagine you want someone to invest in a new initiative that costs $100,000. If you just present it as, "This will cost $100,000. It sounds expensive, but what if you reframe it? We're currently spending $2 million a year on our existing approach with diminishing returns. This new initiative requires a one-time investment of $100,000, which is 5% of what we're already spending, and has the potential to improve our results by 30%. Same cost, completely different perception. Or let's say you want someone to take on a challenging project. If you frame it as, "This is going to be really difficult and time-consuming," they'll resist. But what if you reframe it as, "This is the kind of challenge that people at the next level of their career typically handle. I think you're ready for it, but it's completely your choice." Now, it's not just a difficult project. It's an opportunity for growth and recognition. Same project, different frame, different response. The art of subtle influence is ultimately about understanding that people don't resist ideas, they resist feeling controlled. So the moment you try to force someone to think or act a certain way, you trigger their resistance mechanisms. But when you create the conditions for them to discover insights, when you guide their thinking process without dominating it, when you make them feel like the architect of their own conclusions, they don't resist. They embrace. They commit. They act. And they never realize you influence them at all, which is exactly the point. Chapter 7. Building unshakable credibility through action, not words. There's a pattern you'll notice if you study truly respected people. They rarely talk about their accomplishments, their expertise, or their value. They don't need to. Their work speaks for them. Their results create their reputation. Their actions build credibility that no amount of self-promotion could ever manufacture. And here's the powerful part. This kind of earned credibility is unshakable. It can't be argued with, questioned, or undermined, because it's not based on claims or promises. It's based on demonstrable reality. Compare this to the person who constantly reminds everyone how qualified they are, how much they know, how capable they are at everything. What does that constant self-promotion actually communicate? Insecurity, a need for validation, an absence of concrete results to point to. Because here's the truth, if your work is truly excellent, you don't need to advertise it. Others will do that for you. Your reputation will build itself through the cumulative weight of consistent, high-quality output. This is why quiet power and credibility are inseparable. You can't have real influence without real credibility. And you can't build real credibility through talking. You build it through doing, through showing up, through delivering, through being so consistently reliable and excellent at what you do that people stop questioning your capability and start assuming your competence. Let me break down exactly how action-based credibility works and why it's so much more powerful than reputation built on words. First, actions provide evidence that can't be disputed. Someone can question whether you're really as smart or talented as you claim to be, but they can't question results that exist in objective reality. If you said you could increase sales by 20% and you did it, that's not a matter of opinion. It happened. The evidence speaks for itself. Second, Consistent action builds trust over time in a way that words never can. Anyone can make promises. Anyone can talk about what they're going to do or what they're capable of. But actually following through, repeatedly, in various circumstances, under pressure, that's rare. And when people see you deliver consistently, they start to trust that you'll deliver in the future. That trust is the foundation of credibility. Third, action-based credibility compounds exponentially. Each time you deliver on a commitment, each time you solve a problem effectively, each time you demonstrate competence, you add to your credibility account. And as that account grows, people start giving you the benefit of the doubt in new situations. They assume you can handle challenges because you've proven it before. This creates a positive feedback loop where your reputation opens doors, which gives you opportunities to build more credibility, which opens more doors. Now here's the practical framework for building this kind of unshakable credibility. It starts with a principle that most people violate constantly: under-promise and over-deliver. The instinct when you want to impress someone is to make big promises, to talk up your capabilities, to set high expectations. This is a mistake, because now you've created a standard you have to meet just to avoid disappointment, and you have to exceed to actually impress. But what if you did the opposite? What if you set modest expectations and then exceeded them significantly? Let's say someone asks if you can complete a project by Friday. You know you could probably have it done by Thursday if you push. So you're tempted to promise Wednesday to look impressive. Don't. Say Friday and deliver Wednesday. Now you've created surprise and delight. You've demonstrated that you're not just reliable, you're exceptional. And you didn't have to say a word about how great you are. Your early delivery said it for you. This pattern of quietly exceeding expectations is how you build a reputation as someone who gets things done, not someone who talks about getting things done, not someone who promises to get things done, someone who actually does it, consistently, without drama or fanfare. That's the person everyone wants on their team. Everyone trusts with important work. Everyone respects. The second element of action-based credibility is extreme ownership. When things go wrong, and they will, the immediate instinct for most people is to deflect blame, make excuses, or point fingers at external factors. This is credibility suicide. Because even if those excuses are valid, even if the failure wasn't entirely your fault, the moment you start explaining why it wasn't your fault, you sound defensive and unreliable. The quietly powerful person does something radically different. They take full responsibility, regardless of circumstances. This didn't work out. That's on me. Here's how I'm going to fix it. Notice what this does. First, it shuts down any potential blame game before it starts. Second, it demonstrates maturity and accountability. Third, it shifts focus from the problem to the solution. And fourth, it actually builds credibility even in failure, because people respect someone who owns their mistakes far more than someone who makes excuses. Here's a real example of how this works. Imagine a project fails because another department didn't deliver their part on time. Most people would immediately point that out. Well, if they had given us what we needed when they promised, this wouldn't have happened. technically true, but it makes you look like someone who can't solve problems when dependencies fail. Now compare that to this response. The project didn't succeed, and as the lead, that's my responsibility. I should have built in more buffer time and had contingency plans for if other teams experienced delays. Here's what I'm doing to ensure this doesn't happen again. Same situation, completely different impression. One person sounds like a victim making excuses. The other sounds like a leader who learns from setbacks. The third element of building credibility through action is consistency over intensity. Many people have bursts of impressive productivity or performance. They work incredibly hard for a week, or deliver one exceptional project, and then coast. This doesn't build lasting credibility because people learn they can't count on you to maintain that level. You're unpredictable, but someone who shows up at a solid, reliable level every single day, someone who might not have the most spectacular individual achievements but is consistently competent across everything they do, that person builds ironclad credibility because reliability is more valuable than occasional brilliance. Organizations, leaders, and teams don't just want someone who can have one great performance. They want someone they can count on to perform well consistently, in various situations, under different pressures. Think of it like this. Would you rather have a car that performs amazingly for one trip and then breaks down unpredictably, or a car that performs well consistently, trip after trip, year after year? The answer is obvious. The same logic applies to credibility. Consistent, dependable excellence beats sporadic brilliance every time. The fourth element is doing the unrequired work. This is where most people separate themselves from the quietly powerful. Most people do exactly what's asked of them, nothing more. They meet the explicit requirements and call it done. But people who build exceptional credibility don't just do what's required. They anticipate what else might be needed and do that too without being asked. For example, you're asked to create a report analyzing sales data. Most people create the report as requested and submit it. That's fine. It meets expectations. But what if you went further? What if you not only analyzed the data but also identified 3 specific opportunities based on that data? Created a one-page summary for executives who won't read the full report, and prepared answers to the 5 questions you anticipate people will ask when they see it. You weren't asked to do any of that, but now you've demonstrated initiative, strategic thinking, and consideration for others' needs. You've exceeded expectations without anyone having to ask. That's how you build a reputation for excellence. The final element of action-based credibility is knowing when to say no and following through on it. This seems counterintuitive. How does saying no build credibility? Because it demonstrates that when you say yes, you mean it. If you say yes to everything, if you overcommit constantly, you'll inevitably fail to deliver on some commitments, and each failure erodes your credibility. But if you're selective about what you commit to, if you have the integrity to say, I can't take that on right now, and do it justice, people learn that when you do commit, you'll deliver. Your yes becomes valuable because it's not automatic. This is why the most credible people are often the ones who seem to do less, not more. They're not scattered across dozens of commitments. They're focused on a few key things that they do exceptionally well. And because they're not overextended, They have the capacity to follow through completely on everything they commit to. That consistency of follow-through is what builds unshakable credibility. So if you want quiet power that lasts, stop trying to talk your way into credibility. Stop promoting yourself. Stop reminding people how capable you are. Instead, let your work do the talking. Deliver consistently. Own your failures. Exceed expectations quietly. Do the work others won't. And say no to protect your ability to say yes meaningfully. Do this long enough, and your credibility will become so solid that questioning it would seem absurd. That's when you know you've built something real. Chapter 8. The Magnetic Effect. How Quiet Confidence Attracts Opportunities. There's something fascinating about observing how opportunities flow to different people. Some people chase constantly, networking aggressively, promoting themselves relentlessly, and yet opportunities remain scarce. Others seem to attract opportunities effortlessly without appearing to seek them at all. What's the difference? Quiet confidence. The kind of unshakable self-assurance that doesn't need to announce itself but is felt by everyone in proximity to it. Quiet confidence is magnetic because it's rare. Most people oscillate between insecurity, masked by bravado on one end, and genuine insecurity with no mask on the other. But true quiet confidence, the kind that comes from deep self-knowledge and proven capability, is uncommon enough that people notice it immediately. And they're drawn to it because confidence, real confidence, is reassuring in a world full of uncertainty and pretense. Here's what makes quiet confidence different from regular confidence or arrogance. Arrogance needs to tell you how great it is. It needs validation, admiration, acknowledgement. Regular confidence is comfortable with itself but still somewhat attached to others' opinions. Quiet confidence doesn't need anything from anyone. It knows its own value and doesn't require external confirmation. This self-sufficiency is what makes it magnetic. People are drawn to those who don't need them because, paradoxically, that's when real connection becomes possible. Let me explain the psychology of why this works. When someone needs something from you, whether it's validation, approval, or opportunity, you unconsciously feel the weight of that need. It creates subtle pressure in the interaction. You sense their agenda, their desperation, their attachment to a particular outcome. And that creates resistance. You pull back, even if you're not fully aware you're doing it. This is why needy people, no matter how talented or qualified, struggle to attract opportunities. Their need repels the very things they're chasing. But when someone has quiet confidence, when they clearly don't need anything from you, the entire dynamic shifts. There's no pressure, no hidden agenda you have to navigate, no sense that they're performing or trying to manipulate an outcome. They're just genuinely present, comfortable in themselves, and that comfort creates space for you to relax as well. And in that relaxed, pressure-free space, real connection happens. Opportunities emerge organically because you actually want to help this person or work with them, not because you feel pressured or obligated to. Here's how this plays out in practical situations. Imagine two people at a networking event. Person A works the room desperately, handing out business cards, interrupting conversations to inject themselves, talking up their accomplishments, clearly trying to generate leads or opportunities. Their energy is frantic, needy, transactional. Person B, on the other hand, has a few genuine conversations with people who interest them, asks thoughtful questions, listens more than they speak, and leaves without any aggressive follow-up. Who do you think people remember positively? Who do you think gets called when an opportunity arises? Not person A. Despite all their effort, person A made people feel like a means to an end. They created transactional interactions that everyone wants to escape from. Person B, though, created real connections. They made people feel interesting and valued. And when someone feels genuinely seen and appreciated by you, they naturally want to reciprocate. They think of you when opportunities arise because the interaction felt good, not forced. This is the magnetic effect of quiet confidence. It doesn't chase. It doesn't grab. It doesn't force. It simply shows up as its authentic self, comfortable and self-possessed, and lets others come to it. And they do come, consistently, because that energy is so rare and so refreshing that people actively seek it out. Now, let's talk about how to cultivate this kind of quiet confidence. It starts with genuine competence. You cannot fake quiet confidence for long because it's rooted in real capability and real self-knowledge. If you're constantly worried about being exposed as a fraud, if you secretly doubt your abilities, that anxiety will leak through your behavior no matter how much you try to project confidence. So the foundation is actually becoming good at something, building real skills, accumulating real experience. Confidence built on a foundation of competence is unshakable because you know what you can do. You've proven it to yourself repeatedly. The second element is self-acceptance. Quiet confidence doesn't come from being perfect. It comes from being okay with who you are, including your flaws and limitations. Most people are at war with themselves, constantly criticizing their shortcomings, comparing themselves unfavorably to others, feeling like they're not enough. This internal conflict creates anxiety that others perceive, even if unconsciously. But when you've accepted yourself, when you've made peace with your imperfections while still working to improve, that internal peace radiates outward. You're not defensive because you're not trying to hide anything. You're not arrogant because you're not trying to prove anything. You're just comfortable being exactly who you are. The third element is outcome independence. This is crucial, and it's where most people struggle. Outcome independence means you genuinely don't attach your self-worth or emotional state to any particular outcome. You want opportunities, you work toward goals, but your inner equilibrium doesn't depend on getting them. You're equally okay with yes or no, success or failure, acceptance or rejection. Not because you don't care, but because you know that your value isn't determined by any single outcome. This is magnetic because it eliminates the desperate energy that repels opportunities. When you're outcome independent, you can pursue opportunities without chasing them. You can put yourself in position without forcing things. You can let people know you're interested without begging or manipulating. And because you're genuinely fine either way, people sense they can say no without disappointing you, or yes without you becoming clingy or entitled. This freedom creates space for organic, authentic interactions where real opportunities can emerge. The fourth element of quiet confidence is presence. This ties back to earlier chapters, but it's worth emphasizing here. People with quiet confidence are fully present in interactions because they're not mentally rehearsing what to say next, not worrying about how they're being perceived, not scanning the room for someone more important to talk to. This full presence makes others feel valued and seen, which creates positive associations with you. And when opportunities arise, people naturally think of those who made them feel good, not those who made them feel used or uncomfortable. Here's a practical framework for attracting opportunities through quiet confidence instead of chasing them. First, focus on becoming genuinely excellent at your craft. Pour your energy into developing real skills and deep expertise. This gives you the foundation of competence that quiet confidence requires. Second, build relationships without agenda. Connect with people because they're interesting, not because they might be useful. This creates authentic networks instead of transactional ones. Third, share your knowledge and help others generously, without keeping score or expecting immediate return. This establishes you as someone of value who operates from abundance rather than scarcity. Fourth, when opportunities do arise, evaluate them based on alignment with your values and goals, not based on desperation or fear of missing out. This selectivity makes you more attractive because it signals you're in demand and you have standards. Fifth, when opportunities don't work out, maintain your equilibrium. Don't spiral into self-doubt or bitterness. Stay consistent. Keep delivering value. Trust that more opportunities will come. This emotional stability over time is what separates temporary success from lasting influence. The magnetic effect of quiet confidence is not manipulative strategy. It's the natural result of genuine self-assurance meeting authentic capability. When you know who you are, when you're comfortable with that, when you've built real competence, and when you're not desperate for validation or approval, you become like a gravitational center. Opportunities, people, and resources naturally move toward you because the energy you project is rare, attractive, and trustworthy. You don't have to chase. You just have to be fully and authentically, and let the magnetic pull of quiet confidence do the rest. Chapter 9. Reading Rooms and People. Observational intelligence. While everyone else is busy talking, performing, or worrying about their own presence, the quietly powerful person is doing something far more valuable. They're watching. They're reading the room. They're noticing dynamics that others miss entirely. This observational intelligence is what allows them to navigate social situations with precision, to identify opportunities before they're obvious, and to avoid pitfalls that blindside everyone else. Most people move through the world essentially blind to the subtleties around them. They notice the obvious, the loud, the explicit, but they miss the meaningful glances, the subtle power plays, the unspoken tensions, the hidden alliances, all the real information that determines how situations will actually unfold. This is why they're constantly surprised when things don't go as expected, when the person they thought was supportive undermines them, when the deal they thought was certain falls through, when dynamics shift in ways they didn't anticipate. But people with observational intelligence are rarely surprised. They saw it coming. They noticed the warning signs everyone else missed. They read between the lines, interpreted the subtext, and understood what was really happening beneath the surface conversations. And this awareness gives them an enormous advantage in every situation, because while others are reacting to what's obvious, they're responding to what's real. Here's what observational intelligence actually looks like in practice. You walk into a meeting. Most people immediately start positioning themselves, thinking about what they're going to say, checking their phones, or making small talk. The observationally intelligent person is doing something different. They're noticing who sits where and why. They're observing who makes eye contact with whom and who avoids it. They're picking up on the energy in the room, whether it's tense or relaxed, formal or casual. They're identifying who has actual power versus who has formal authority. And they're doing all of this before a single word of official business is spoken. This reconnaissance gives them information that shapes every interaction that follows. If they notice tension between two key stakeholders, they know not to propose anything that requires those two to collaborate closely. If they observe that the person running the meeting keeps deferring to someone else, they know who actually needs to be convinced, regardless of org charts or titles. If they sense that everyone is exhausted or distracted, they know this isn't the time to introduce a complex new idea that requires deep thought. Let me give you a framework for developing this kind of observational intelligence. It starts with shifting your default mode from broadcasting to receiving. Most people's default in social situations is to think about what they're going to say or do next. They're in broadcast mode, focused on their own performance. To develop observational intelligence, you need to spend more time in receiving mode, where your attention is focused outward on gathering information rather than inward on managing your own presentation. This is harder than it sounds because it requires quieting your ego. Your ego wants attention, wants to contribute, wants to be noticed. But observational intelligence requires making your ego secondary to your awareness. You have to be comfortable being quiet, being in the background, being the observer rather than the observed. And most people struggle with this because they feel like if they're not actively participating, they're not adding value. They're wrong. The value you add through accurate observation and strategic timing far exceeds the value of constant participation. The second element of observational intelligence is learning to read non-verbal communication. Research suggests that somewhere between 60 to 90% of communication is non-verbal. Body language, facial expressions, tone of voice, spatial positioning, all of these convey information that's often more truthful than the actual words being spoken. People can control their words fairly easily, but controlling unconscious, non-verbal signals is much harder. So when someone says they're fine with a decision but their arms are crossed, their jaw is tight, and they're leaning away from the table, what's the real message? They're not fine. They're opposed, but not saying so explicitly. When someone verbally agrees with a proposal but won't make eye contact with the person presenting it, what does that tell you? Probably that they're agreeing superficially but have no intention of supporting it genuinely. These non-verbal signals give you the real story beneath the official narrative. The third element is pattern recognition. Observational intelligence isn't just about noticing things in the moment. It's about recognizing patterns over time. How does this person typically behave when they're stressed versus confident? What does this group dynamic look like when it's functioning well versus when there's underlying conflict? When this particular leader says, "Let me think about it," does that usually mean they're genuinely considering it? Or is it their polite way of saying no? When you've observed enough interactions, you start to recognize patterns that predict outcomes. You know that when these two people start disagreeing in meetings, the project is probably going to stall because neither will back down. You know that when this particular stakeholder asks questions in a certain way, they're actually signaling opposition, not curiosity. You know that when the energy in the room shifts in a specific way, the conversation is about to become unproductive. This pattern recognition allows you to anticipate and navigate situations proactively rather than just reacting as things unfold. The fourth element of observational intelligence is understanding power dynamics and social hierarchies. Every group has them, even if they're not formalized. There's always someone whose opinion carries more weight, someone who influences others, someone who serves as a bridge between factions, someone who's marginalized, regardless of their formal role. Mapping these dynamics quickly tells you how to navigate the group effectively. For instance, you might notice that when a particular person speaks, others listen more carefully. That person has informal authority, and getting them on your side is probably more important than convincing the formal leader. Or you might observe that two people always align their positions, which tells you they're a voting bloc you need to approach as a unit rather than individually. Or you notice someone who's repeatedly talked over or ignored, which might make them a potential ally since they're likely frustrated with the current dynamic. The fifth element is recognizing emotional undercurrents. Every interaction has an emotional layer beneath the logical content. People aren't just exchanging information and making rational decisions. They're also managing egos, processing insecurities, nurturing grudges, seeking validation, protecting turf, pursuing hidden agendas. The observationally intelligent person picks up on these emotional undercurrents and understands that they often matter more than the logical content of what's being discussed. When someone keeps bringing up a minor point that's logically irrelevant, they're probably not really concerned about that point. They're expressing something else, maybe feeling unheard, maybe asserting their relevance, maybe testing their influence. When a discussion becomes unexpectedly heated over what should be a straightforward decision, there's probably emotional history or stakes you're not seeing. The ability to recognize these emotional undercurrents helps you respond to what's actually happening rather than what appears to be happening on the surface. Now here's how you practice and develop observational intelligence. Start by deliberately putting yourself in observer mode in low-stakes situations. Maybe at a social gathering. Instead of trying to be the life of the party, consciously observe. Who's having genuine conversations versus superficial ones? Who seems comfortable versus anxious? Who's naturally drawing others to them, and who's working hard to maintain attention? Don't judge these observations. Just notice them. In professional settings, arrive to meetings early and watch how people enter and position themselves. Who chooses to sit where? Who arrives together, suggesting alignment? Who makes a point of not sitting near someone else, suggesting tension? Who immediately pulls out their phone versus who makes eye contact and engages? These seemingly small observations accumulate into useful intelligence about how to navigate that group. Practice reading individual people by paying attention to their baseline behavior first. You can't identify deviation from normal if you don't know what normal looks like for them. So, when you interact with someone regularly, mentally note how they typically behave when they're relaxed and comfortable. Then when you see them behaving differently, you know something has changed, even if they're not explicitly telling you what. The ultimate goal of observational intelligence is not manipulation. It's navigation. It's understanding the reality of situations so you can move through them effectively. Build genuine relationships, identify real opportunities, and avoid unnecessary conflicts or failures. People with high observational intelligence don't need to control rooms through force because they understand rooms so well they can influence them subtly and naturally. They don't need to demand attention because they know exactly when and how to contribute for maximum impact. They don't get blindsided by sudden changes because they saw the warning signs long before things became obvious. That's the power of truly seeing what everyone else is too busy performing to notice. Chapter 10. The Long Game. Playing chess, while others play checkers. Here's a hard truth about power that most people learn too late. The person who wins today but sacrifices tomorrow has no real power. The person who forces a short-term victory but damages long-term relationships has no real influence. The person who achieves immediate success but burns out or burns bridges in the process has built nothing sustainable. Real power, quiet power, is always playing the long game. It's thinking in decades while others are thinking in days. It's building for permanence while others are chasing temporary wins. This is the fundamental difference between chess thinking and checkers thinking. Checkers is about immediate captures, obvious moves, simple tactics. There's nothing wrong with checkers, but it's a limited game. Chess is about positioning, about setting up combinations 5 moves ahead, about creating situations where you win, not through a single brilliant move, but through the cumulative effect of strategic positioning over time. And that's exactly how the quietly powerful operate. They're playing chess while everyone around them is playing checkers. Let me give you a concrete example of what this looks like. Imagine you're working on a team and there's credit to be claimed for a successful project. The checkers player fights aggressively to ensure they get recognized, possibly at the expense of others, possibly by exaggerating their contribution. They get the immediate win, the recognition, the pat on the back. But what have they lost? The trust of teammates, the goodwill of colleagues who notice the credit grabbing, their reputation as someone who builds others up versus someone who only promotes themselves. These costs might not be immediately visible, but they compound over time. The chess player does something different. They share credit generously, even deflecting it toward others who contributed. They might even let someone else take the spotlight entirely, while quietly ensuring that key decision-makers know the real story. In the moment, this looks like they lost. They didn't get the public recognition. But what did they gain? The fierce loyalty of teammates who know they'll be treated fairly. The reputation as someone secure enough to share success. The respect of observant leaders who notice the difference between self-promoters and genuine value creators. And 5 years later, when it's time to choose who leads the next major initiative, who do you think gets selected? Not the person known for grabbing credit. The person known for building great teams and delivering results without ego drama. This is long game thinking. Every decision is evaluated not just on its immediate impact, but on how it positions you for the future. Every interaction is viewed not as a standalone transaction, but as one move in an ongoing game that spans years or decades. Every choice to restrain yourself, to be generous, to take the high road even when the low road would be easier, is an investment in your long-term influence and credibility. Let me break down the key principles of playing the long game. First, prioritize relationships over transactions. In the short term, you can extract maximum value from every interaction, squeeze every advantage, win every negotiation. This might maximize immediate gain, but it destroys relationships. And relationships are the foundation of sustained success. The chess player knows that the value of a strong relationship over 10 years far exceeds the value of winning a single transaction. So they optimize for relationship strength even when it means accepting less favorable terms in the moment. This doesn't mean being a pushover. It means being fair, being generous where possible, and never destroying a relationship for marginal short-term gain. When you consistently operate this way, you build a network of people who trust you, who want to work with you again, who recommend you to others, who give you the benefit of the doubt when things get complicated. That network becomes increasingly valuable over time and opens doors that no amount of aggressive short-term optimization ever could. Second principle is invest in reputation systematically. Your reputation is an asset that compounds over time, but only if you're intentional about building it. Every interaction either adds to your reputation or detracts from it. Every commitment you keep or break. Every time you do or don't follow through. Every instance where you demonstrate integrity or compromise it. All of these accumulate into the story people tell about who you are. The checkers player doesn't think about this. They might lie to win a deal, thinking only about the immediate benefit. They might break a promise when it's inconvenient, thinking only about the short-term relief. They might take credit they didn't earn, thinking only about the immediate recognition. Each instance seems small, seems like it doesn't matter. But reputation is built exactly this way, through the accumulation of small signals about who you really are. And once a reputation is damaged, it's exponentially harder to repair than it was to build in the first place. The chess player protects their reputation like the strategic asset it is. They keep promises even when it's hard, because they know their word has to mean something if they want long-term influence. They tell the truth even when a lie would be more convenient, because they know that being caught in even one lie can destroy years of accumulated trust. They take responsibility for failures because they know that integrity in failure builds respect that will matter in future successes. Third principle is create optionality for your future self. Many people make decisions that feel optimal in the moment but constrain their future choices. They burn bridges. They lock themselves into specific paths. They make commitments that limit flexibility. The chess player does the opposite. They make decisions that preserve and ideally expand their future options. This might mean not taking the highest-paying job if it's in a declining industry that will limit future opportunities. It might mean maintaining relationships even with people you're not currently working with because you never know when those connections will become valuable. It might mean developing multiple skills instead of over-specializing, because versatility creates more opportunities than narrow expertise. It's thinking not just about where this decision gets you immediately, but about what doors it opens or closes for future you. Fourth principle is compound small advantages over time. The checkers player is always looking for the big, dramatic win, the game-changing move. The chess player knows that most games are won through the accumulation of small positional advantages. One slightly better decision today, another tomorrow, better positioning next week, a small opportunity capitalized on next month. None of these is transformative individually, but compound them over years, and the cumulative effect is massive. This is why consistency matters so much in the long game. You don't need to be spectacular. You need to be excellent consistently. You don't need breakthrough moments. You need steady progress. You don't need to win big immediately. You need to avoid losing while positioning yourself to win bigger later. The person who improves 1% every week is unrecognizable, vastly superior after just a few years, but they're barely different week to week. That's the power of compounding. Chapter 11. The Shield of Silence. How to handle criticism and attacks. One of the most powerful demonstrations of quiet strength is how you respond when you're criticized, attacked, or disrespected. Most people immediately react, defending themselves, counterattacking, or seeking vindication. But this reaction, while natural, reveals weakness. It shows that the criticism got through your defenses, that the attacker successfully triggered an emotional response, that you can be controlled by others' words. The person with quiet power responds completely differently. They use silence as a shield, and that shield is impenetrable. Here's what most people don't understand about criticism and attacks. They only have the power you give them. Someone can say anything they want about you. But if you don't react, if you don't give their words energy and attention, those words die in the air. They have no momentum, no impact, no life beyond the moment they were spoken. But the second you react defensively, you've given those words power. You've shown they matter to you. You've elevated the critic by engaging with them. And you've started a cycle that never ends well. Strategic silence in the face of criticism works on multiple levels. First, it denies the attacker the satisfaction of getting a reaction. Most people who criticize or attack others are seeking a response. They want to see you rattled, defensive, emotional. When you give them nothing, when you remain calm and unmoved, you've denied them what they came for. This is psychologically frustrating for them and often causes them to either escalate to the point where they look unreasonable or give up entirely. Second, your silence forces observers to focus on the criticism itself rather than your reaction to it. If the criticism is baseless, people will see that without you needing to defend yourself. If the criticism has merit, your calm acceptance of it makes you look mature and self-aware rather than defensive. Either way, you win by not playing the game. Third, silence preserves your energy and dignity. Getting into arguments with critics is exhausting and degrading. Every moment you spend defending yourself is a moment you're not spending on productive work or positive relationships. Quiet power means valuing your time and energy too much to waste it on people who don't deserve it. Now, this doesn't mean you never address criticism. There's a crucial distinction between reacting and responding. Reacting is immediate, emotional, and defensive. Responding is deliberate, strategic, and only when necessary. If criticism comes from someone whose opinion you genuinely respect, or if it's affecting important relationships or opportunities, then you might choose to respond. But even then, you do it on your terms, in your timing, and from a place of calm clarity rather than emotional reactivity. Here's the framework for handling criticism with quiet power. First, pause. Never respond immediately to criticism or attacks. Take time to process, to separate your emotional reaction from strategic assessment, to decide if a response is even necessary. Most criticism doesn't warrant any response at all. Second, evaluate the source. Is this person credible? Do they have your best interests at heart? Are they speaking from knowledge or ignorance? If the source isn't credible or well-intentioned, their criticism can be safely ignored. Third, extract any valid feedback. Even harsh or poorly delivered criticism sometimes contains a kernel of truth. Can you find that truth without accepting the packaging? If so, use it to improve while discarding the rest. Fourth, if you do choose to respond, do so calmly and briefly. Acknowledge valid points if they exist. Correct factual errors if necessary. And then move on. Don't over-explain. Don't get emotional. Don't try to convince your critic they're wrong. State your perspective once clearly and then disengage. Long defensive arguments make you look weak. Brief, calm responses make you look confident and in control. Fifth, let your continued success be your response. The best answer to criticism is not words, but results. Keep doing excellent work. Keep building your reputation through action. Keep moving toward your goals. Over time, your track record will speak louder than any critic's words. People who matter will judge you based on what you actually accomplish, not on what someone said about you. Here's a real-world example. Imagine someone publicly criticizes your work or questions your competence. The reactive response is to immediately defend yourself, to explain why they're wrong, to point out your credentials and achievements. But this makes you look insecure and gives the criticism more attention and credibility than it deserves. The quiet power response is silence. You see the criticism, you note it, and then you continue doing your excellent work. You don't address it, you don't acknowledge it, you don't give it energy. And what happens? Within days, it's forgotten by everyone except the person who made it. Your silence starved it of the oxygen it needed to spread and persist. The shield of silence also protects you from a more subtle form of attack, the constant low-level negativity and doubt that people project onto anyone trying to achieve something significant. When you're pursuing ambitious goals, there will always be people questioning whether you can do it, warning you of the risks, pointing out the obstacles. Most of this comes from their own fear and limitations, not from genuine concern for you. Responding to every doubt and every warning is exhausting and demoralizing. But when you develop the shield of silence, when you can hear these things and let them pass through you without impact, you protect your motivation and forward momentum. The ultimate truth about criticism and attacks is this: they cannot diminish you unless you allow them to. Your value, your competence, your worth. None of these things change based on what someone else says about you. They only change based on what you actually do and who you actually are. When you deeply understand this, criticism loses its power over you. It becomes just noise, sometimes containing useful information, but more often just revealing the fears and insecurities of the person speaking. And you can move through the world impervious to that noise, focused on what actually matters, protected by the quiet strength that comes from knowing who you are and not needing anyone else to validate it. Chapter 12. Quiet Leadership. Leading without the title. The most profound form of leadership has nothing to do with titles, positions, or formal authority. It's the ability to influence direction, inspire action, and create change without anyone appointing you to do so. This is quiet leadership, and it's available to anyone regardless of where they sit in a hierarchy. In fact, some of the most powerful leaders in any organization have no formal leadership role at all. They lead through competence, character, and the quiet confidence that makes others want to follow them. Traditional leadership relies on position power. You can tell people what to do because you're the boss. They comply because they have to, not because they want to. This creates a fragile form of influence that disappears the moment you lose the title. But quiet leadership relies on personal power. People follow you because they respect you, trust you, and believe in your judgment. This creates lasting influence that persists regardless of your formal position. Here's what quiet leadership looks like in practice. You don't wait for permission to solve problems. You see what needs to be done, and you do it. Or you take initiative to organize others to do it. You don't announce you're taking charge. You just start creating solutions, and others naturally align with your efforts because the solutions are good and you're making them happen. This is leadership through action, not declaration. Quiet leaders also lead through questions rather than directives. Instead of telling people what to do, they ask questions that help people think more clearly about the situation. Have we considered this angle? What would happen if we tried that approach? What's the real problem we're trying to solve here? These questions guide thinking without controlling it, which makes people feel empowered rather than managed. And when people arrive at conclusions through their own thinking, they're far more committed to the path forward than if they were simply following orders. Another hallmark of quiet leadership is developing others. Formal leaders often feel threatened by capable subordinates and may consciously or unconsciously limit their development. But quiet leaders have no such insecurity. They actively help others grow because they're not worried about being outshined. They share knowledge freely, create opportunities for others to lead, and take genuine joy in others' success. This generosity creates loyalty and respect that no amount of positional authority can generate. Quiet leaders also lead by example in ways that matter. They don't just talk about values, they embody them. If the team is facing a difficult deadline, they're the first one to stay late and the last one to leave. If there's unpleasant work to be done, they roll up their sleeves and do it alongside everyone else. If they ask others to meet high standards, they hold themselves to even higher standards. This integrity between words and actions creates moral authority that's far more powerful than any title. Here's the framework for developing quiet leadership. First, focus on being valuable rather than being in charge. Develop expertise that makes you the go-to person for important challenges. Build a reputation for getting difficult things done. Become someone whose input is sought because people trust your judgment and capability. When you're genuinely valuable, influence flows to you naturally, without you needing to claim it. Second, think institutionally, not personally. Quiet leaders care about outcomes for the team or organization, not about credit for themselves. They're willing to let others take credit for ideas they contributed to. They support initiatives that serve the mission, even if those initiatives don't benefit them personally. This selflessness earns trust because people see you're not playing political games or building your own empire. You're genuinely focused on what's best for everyone. Third, create clarity in chaos. One of the most valuable things any leader can do is help people understand complex situations and identify the right path forward. Quiet leaders do this not by pretending to have all the answers, but by asking good questions, synthesizing diverse inputs, and articulating possibilities clearly. When everything feels confusing and people don't know what to do, the person who can create clarity naturally becomes someone others look to for direction. Fourth, build bridges and resolve conflicts. Organizations and teams always have tensions, disagreements, and miscommunications. Most people either ignore these problems or take sides, making things worse. Quiet leaders step into the gap. They listen to all perspectives, find common ground, and help people work through differences constructively. This peacemaking role is exhausting and often thankless, but it's essential, and people remember who helped them navigate difficult interpersonal situations, which creates deep loyalty and respect. Fifth, stay calm under pressure. When crisis hits, when everything's going wrong, when emotions are running high, the person who maintains composure and thinks clearly becomes the de facto leader, regardless of titles. Quiet leaders develop this capacity through emotional mastery and perspective. They've seen enough challenges to know that most crises are temporary. They've built enough confidence in their abilities to trust they can handle whatever emerges. And that calm confidence is contagious, helping others find their own center in the storm. The beautiful thing about quiet leadership is that it's completely under your control. You don't need anyone's permission to become this kind of leader. You don't need to wait for a promotion or a title. You can start leading quietly right now, right where you are, in whatever role you currently occupy. And as you do, you'll discover something powerful. Real leadership isn't about the position you hold. It's about the person you become and the positive influence that naturally flows from being that person. Chapter 13. Maintaining power over time. The discipline of consistency. Building quiet power is hard. Maintaining it over years and decades is even harder. The challenge isn't just achieving a level of competence, credibility, and influence. The challenge is sustaining that level when the initial motivation fades, when obstacles arise, when success makes you complacent, when failure makes you doubt yourself. This is where most people fail. They build something impressive and then gradually let it decay. But those who understand the discipline of consistency maintain and even amplify their power over time. The first threat to sustained power is complacency. You achieve a certain level of success, and unconsciously you start coasting. You stop learning as aggressively. You stop pushing yourself as hard. You rely on your reputation rather than continuing to earn it daily. And while you're coasting, the world is moving forward. Your skills are becoming outdated. Your relationships are weakening from neglect. Your reputation is slowly eroding because people remember what you did lately, not what you did years ago. Complacency is the silent killer of sustained success. The antidote to complacency is treating every day like you're still building. Never assume you've arrived. Never rest on past achievements. Never let your current success convince you that you can stop doing the things that created that success. This requires psychological discipline because it means denying yourself the reward of relaxation even when you've earned it. But this is the price of sustained excellence. Those who stay at the top for decades are the ones who never stop climbing, who never stop improving, who never stop treating each day like it matters. The second threat is inconsistency. You build credibility through reliable behavior, but then you have an off period where you're dealing with personal issues or burnout. Your performance drops, your responsiveness declines, your standards slip, and people notice. It doesn't take much inconsistency to damage a reputation that took years to build. Trust is built slowly and destroyed quickly. One period of unreliability can undo months or years of consistent excellence in people's minds. Protecting against this requires building systems and buffers. Systems automate excellence, so you don't have to rely purely on willpower and motivation. If you have a system for continuous learning, you'll keep developing skills even when you don't feel motivated. If you have a system for maintaining relationships, you'll stay connected even during busy periods. If you have systems for health, work quality, and personal development, these things continue happening even when life gets chaotic. Buffers mean having enough margin in your schedule, your finances, and your energy that temporary setbacks don't force you to compromise your standards. The third threat is changing with the times without losing your core. The world evolves. Industries transform. Technologies emerge. Social norms shift. If you don't adapt, you become irrelevant. But if you change too much, you lose the authentic core that made you powerful in the first place. This balance is delicate. You need to be flexible enough to remain relevant, but grounded enough to maintain identity and principles. Those who sustain power over decades manage this by distinguishing between tactics and values. Tactics should evolve constantly, based on changing circumstances. Values should remain constant, regardless of external changes. The fourth threat is isolation. Success often separates you from the feedback loops that helped you improve. People become less willing to give you honest criticism. You have fewer peers who can challenge your thinking. You might surround yourself with people who agree with you rather than people who make you better. This isolation causes blind spots to develop, mistakes to go uncorrected, and gradual decline to go unnoticed until it's severe. Protecting against this requires deliberately maintaining relationships with people who will tell you the truth, seeking out criticism rather than avoiding it, and staying curious about perspectives that challenge your assumptions. Here's the framework for maintaining power over time. First, create non-negotiable standards that you meet regardless of circumstances. These might be daily habits, quality benchmarks, relationship maintenance activities, whatever is essential to your continued excellence. Make meeting these standards automatic, not optional. Second, schedule regular self-assessment. Monthly or quarterly, take time to honestly evaluate where you are versus where you want to be. Are you still learning? Still growing? Still delivering value? Still living your principles? This prevents slow drift that goes unnoticed until it's created serious problems. Third, invest in your future self continuously. Every day, do something that makes you more capable, knowledgeable, connected, or healthy a year from now. This might be learning something new, building a relationship, taking care of your body, or developing a skill. The compounding effect of these daily investments is what separates those who remain powerful for decades from those who peak and decline. Fourth, protect your reputation obsessively. It's your most valuable asset, and it's fragile. Every interaction, every commitment, every public statement either builds or erodes it. Make decisions with the question, how will this affect my reputation 5 years from now? Fifth, stay humble and hungry. Humble enough to keep learning from everyone and everything. Hungry enough to never settle for current achievement. This combination prevents both arrogance and complacency, the two states that most often lead to decline. The people who sustain excellence over the longest periods are the ones who remain students of their craft, who maintain beginner's mind even as they become masters, who never believe they've figured everything out. Maintaining quiet power over time isn't glamorous. It's showing up consistently when no one's watching. It's maintaining standards when it would be easier to let them slide. It's continuing to invest in your development when you could coast on past achievements. It's discipline, systems, and commitment playing out over years and decades. But this is how you build a legacy. This is how you become someone whose influence spans a lifetime rather than a moment. And that long-term impact is what quiet power is ultimately about. Chapter 14. The Art of Strategic Relationships. Building alliances that amplify power. No one builds lasting power in isolation. Even the most quietly powerful individuals succeed through relationships, through strategic alliances that multiply their influence and expand their possibilities. But these aren't the transactional networking relationships that most people cultivate. They're deeper, more genuine, more strategically constructed connections that create mutual value over years or decades. Understanding how to build and maintain these relationships is essential to sustained power. The foundation of strategic relationships is genuine value creation. Most people approach relationships asking what they can extract. What can this person do for me? How can I use this connection? This extractive mindset creates shallow relationships that dissolve the moment they stop being immediately useful. But strategic relationships are built on what you can contribute. How can I help this person succeed? What value can I add to their life or work? What problems can I solve for them? When you approach relationships this way, you create genuine bonds that persist and strengthen over time. Here's what makes a relationship truly strategic. First, mutual respect and aligned values. You should genuinely respect the other person's capabilities, character, and judgment. And there should be fundamental alignment in values, even if you differ in tactics or opinions. Without this foundation, the relationship will be strained and ultimately unsustainable. Second, complementary strengths. The most powerful alliances are between people who are strong in different areas. Your weaknesses are their strengths, and vice versa. This creates natural opportunities for collaboration and mutual support. Third, long-term orientation. Strategic relationships aren't about immediate transactions. They're about building connections that will be valuable for years or decades. This means investing in relationships even when you don't have an immediate need. It means helping people when you can't see how they'll help you back. It means playing an infinite game rather than optimizing for short-term extraction. Fourth, trust built through consistency. Trust in strategic relationships comes from repeatedly demonstrating reliability, discretion, and genuine care for the other person's success. It's built through small actions over time, not grand gestures. Now here's the framework for building strategic relationships. First, be genuinely interested in others, not as a manipulation tactic, but as authentic curiosity about who they are, what they care about, what challenges they face, what they're trying to build. People can sense the difference between someone who's genuinely interested and someone who's just collecting contacts. Genuine interest creates connection. Fake interest creates distance. Second, give before you ask. When you meet someone interesting, look for ways to help them before you ever ask them for anything. Make an introduction they'd find valuable. Share information relevant to their challenges. Offer your expertise if it would be useful. This establishes you as someone who creates value in relationships rather than just consuming it. And it creates natural reciprocity without you having to explicitly request it. Third, maintain relationships through the valleys, not just the peaks. Most people are great at relationship maintenance when things are going well, or when they need something. But strategic relationships are maintained especially during periods when you don't need anything from the other person. Regular check-ins, thoughtful messages, small gestures of support. These things matter most when there's no immediate purpose. They show you value the person, not just what they can do for you. Fourth, be strategically vulnerable. Vulnerability creates depth in relationships, but it must be calibrated carefully. Share challenges you're facing, questions you're wrestling with, mistakes you've made. This humanizes you and creates space for authentic connection. But don't overshare in ways that undermine credibility or create inappropriate burdens. The goal is strategic vulnerability that builds trust without damaging respect. Fifth, create value through connection. One of the most powerful things you can do in relationships is connect people who should know each other. When you introduce two people who can create value for each other, you've created value for both of them. This positions you as a valuable connector and strengthens your relationships with both parties. Over time, this creates a network effect where your value to everyone in your network increases because of your ability to access and connect other valuable people. Here's what strategic relationships look like in practice. You maintain a circle of people you genuinely respect and who respect you. You interact with them regularly, not always with an agenda, but to stay connected and aware of what's happening in their lives and work. When opportunities arise that could benefit someone in your network, you think of them. When you face challenges, you have people you can call for advice or support. When you're making important decisions, you have trusted advisors who will tell you the truth. The power of strategic relationships compounds over time. Early in your career, these relationships might provide advice, opportunities, or introductions. Later, they become collaborators on significant projects. Eventually, they might become partners in major ventures or mutual champions in your respective fields. But this progression only happens if you build genuine relationships and maintain them consistently over years and decades. The mistake most people make is treating relationships as transactions. They reach out only when they need something, then disappear until the next need. This burns through relationships quickly and creates a reputation as a user. Strategic relationships require investment without immediate return. They require genuine care for others' success. They require being valuable to others before expecting others to be valuable to you. But when you approach relationships this way, you build a network of genuine allies who multiply your power in ways that purely transactional relationships never could. Chapter 15. Silent Legacy. Building influence that outlasts you. The ultimate expression of quiet power is legacy. Not the loud legacy of monuments and public recognition, but the silent legacy of lives changed, ideas spread, systems improved, people developed. This is influence that persists long after you're gone, not because you carved your name on anything, but because you shaped how others think, act, and lead. This kind of legacy can't be bought or demanded. It can only be earned through decades of living the principles we've discussed. Most people think about legacy wrong. They want their name remembered. They want credit for their contributions. They want recognition and accolades. But this is ego, not legacy. True legacy is anonymous influence. It's the leader you developed who goes on to develop dozens more leaders. It's the idea you planted that spreads and evolves far beyond your original conception. It's the standard you modeled that becomes the new normal in your field. It's the lives you improved in ways both people may not even consciously recognize. Here's what creates lasting legacy. First, investing in people, not projects. Projects end. People continue. When you invest your time and wisdom in developing others, when you help them become more capable, more confident, more thoughtful, that investment multiplies. Those people go on to influence others, who influence others, creating ripple effects that extend far beyond what you could have accomplished alone. This is exponential impact. Second, creating systems and processes that persist. When you solve a problem, you can solve it just for yourself, or you can create a system that helps everyone solve it. When you develop a skill, you can keep it to yourself, or you can create a process that helps others develop that skill. Systems and processes outlast individuals. They institutionalize excellence and make it accessible to people you'll never meet. This is how your influence extends beyond your personal reach. Third, modeling principles under pressure. Anyone can live their values when it's easy. Legacy is built by those who maintain their principles when it costs them something. When you turn down a lucrative opportunity because it conflicts with your values, when you take a stand that risks your reputation, when you maintain integrity, when cutting corners would be easier, people notice, and they remember. And some of them internalize those principles and pass them on. This is how values propagate across generations. Fourth, teaching not just what, but why and how. Knowledge transfer is valuable, but wisdom transfer is transformative. When you teach someone what to do, you help them once. When you teach them why it matters and how to think about similar situations, you've given them a framework they can use for life. The most powerful legacy builders are those who help others develop their own judgment and capability, not those who create dependence on their superior knowledge. Fifth, empowering others to surpass you. This might be the hardest aspect of legacy building, because it requires genuine security and lack of ego. The greatest legacy isn't having people forever in your shadow. It's developing people who go on to accomplish things you never could. When your students become masters who exceed your accomplishments, when the organizations you helped build go on to achieve things beyond what you imagined, when the ideas you started evolve in ways you never anticipated, that's when you know your legacy is real. Here's the framework for building silent legacy. First, shift your time horizon beyond your lifetime. Make decisions and investments that might not pay off for you, but will pay off for others. Plant trees whose shade you'll never sit in. Start initiatives that might not fully mature until you're gone. This requires accepting that the most important work you do might never be attributed to you. Second, document your thinking and methods, not for recognition, but for transmission. Write down what you've learned. Create guides and frameworks. Record your reasoning about important decisions. Make your intellectual property accessible to those who come after you. The insights you've gained through decades of experience are valuable, but only if they're transmitted to the next generation. Third, create opportunities for others. Use whatever power and access you have to open doors for people who deserve chances. Champion the talented but overlooked. Create platforms for diverse voices. Build systems that give more people shots at success. The opportunities you create for others multiply in ways you can't predict, but which extend your influence far into the future. Fourth, live with integrity. That becomes your teaching. Your actions are observed more than your words are heard. When you consistently demonstrate courage, integrity, competence, and care for others, you're teaching without lecturing. You're modeling what's possible. And some percentage of people watching will internalize those standards and carry them forward. This is education through example. Fifth, let go of credit and recognition. The more you need credit, the less influence you ultimately have. The willingness to do important work without recognition, to let others take credit for ideas you contributed to celebrate others' success without jealousy. This creates a different kind of power. It allows you to focus purely on impact rather than image. And ironically, this often creates more lasting recognition than chasing it ever could. The beautiful paradox of silent legacy is that by not seeking recognition, you often end up with more meaningful recognition. The people whose lives you changed remember you. The people you developed credit you with their success. The ideas you planted are attributed back to you by those who know the real history. But this recognition is genuine and lasting, unlike the manufactured recognition of those who constantly promote themselves. Building silent legacy is the ultimate expression of quiet power because it demonstrates complete transcendence of ego. You're no longer working for your own success, recognition, or benefit. You're working to create value that outlasts you. You're investing in futures you won't see. You're helping others succeed in ways that might eclipse your own achievements. And you're doing it all quietly, without fanfare, without demanding credit. This is how the most powerful people throughout history actually changed the world. Not through loud declarations or monuments to themselves, but through the quiet accumulation of influence, the patient development of others, the steady improvement of systems, the consistent modeling of principles. Their names might be forgotten, but their influence persists. And that lasting impact, that ripple effect that continues long after they're gone, that is the ultimate power. That is what it means to be quietly powerful. Not just in a moment, not just for yourself, but in ways that transcend time and touch lives you'll never know about. That is the art of silent influence, mastered completely.